The train station smelled of coal smoke and wet wood, the air thick with disappointment and quiet judgment. People moved quickly along the platform, clutching luggage and hopes, but Clara Whitfield stood very still beside her single worn suitcase. The letter in her gloved hands trembled slightly as she read the last line again, even though she had already memorized every word. "I regret to inform you that I have chosen another bride." The words seemed colder each time she looked at them. Around her, the other women who had arrived on the mail-order train were being greeted by hopeful men, farmers, ranchers, and miners who had written letters full of promises. Some of the women were smiling shyly as their future husbands introduced themselves. Others were already being led away toward wagons waiting beyond the station. But Clara stood alone. She had come all the way from Ohio after months of letters with a rancher named Thomas Delaney. His handwriting had been neat, careful, and kind. He had written about his cattle ranch in Montana Territory, about the quiet valley where he lived, about the loneliness of frontier life. In his letters, he had sounded gentle and thoughtful. He had promised he would be waiting at the station. But he wasn't. Instead, the rejection letter had arrived with the station master only minutes before the train pulled in. Clara folded the paper slowly, forcing her trembling fingers to obey. Her throat burned, but she refused to cry. She had promised herself she would not cry in front of strangers. Not again. A group of men nearby glanced at her briefly before turning away. She saw the silent calculation in their eyes, the way they judged her plain brown dress, her serious face, the small scar near her eyebrow from when she had fallen out of a tree as a child. She had always been told she was respectable, which meant not beautiful enough to notice. A younger girl who had arrived on the train clutched the arm of a tall rancher beside her and whispered happily, "I'm so glad you chose me." The man laughed warmly and lifted her suitcase with ease. Clara looked down at her own worn case and felt the ache of embarrassment pressing into her chest. She was 28 years old. Too old for hopeful dreams, according to most people. And now she had crossed half a country only to discover she had not been chosen after all. The station slowly emptied as wagons rolled away and couples disappeared down the dusty road. The afternoon sun slid lower across the wide Montana sky. Finally, the platform grew quiet. Clara sat down on a wooden bench and folded her hands in her lap, trying to think clearly. She had enough money for a few nights at the boarding house the station master had mentioned. After that, well, she would find work somehow. She always had. Life had taught her that hope was a luxury some people simply could not afford. A gust of wind pushed dust across the platform, lifting a few loose strands of her dark hair. She tucked them behind her ear and stared at the distant hills. That was when she heard the soft crunch of boots on gravel. "Miss." The voice was low, careful. Clara looked up. A tall cowboy stood a few steps away, his hat pulled low against the sun. He was broad-shouldered, his denim shirt faded from long days under open skies. Dust clung to his boots, and a coil of rope hung from the saddle of the horse tied behind him. He looked strong in the quiet, steady way of a man used to hard work. But it was his eyes that caught Clara's attention. They were tired, not unkind, just tired. "Yes," she said politely. He removed his hat, revealing tousled dark hair. "You're Miss Whitfield, aren't you?" Clara blinked in surprise. "I am," she said cautiously, "but I'm afraid my arrangement has already been canceled." The cowboy nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer. "I know," she frowned. "You do. I heard the station master mention it." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "My name's Daniel Carter." Clara waited. Daniel glanced toward the road and then back at her. For a moment He seemed to be searching for the right words. "I wasn't planning on speaking to anyone today," he admitted quietly, "but when I saw you sitting here—" He hesitated again. Clara studied him carefully. His face was sun-browned, with a faint line across his jaw where an old scar had healed. He looked perhaps 35, older than most of the men who had come to meet brides. There was something steady about him. Something honest. "You saw me sitting here," she repeated gently. Daniel gave a small, self-conscious smile. "Yes, ma'am." He rubbed the back of his neck. "This is going to sound strange." Clara raised an eyebrow. Strange days seemed to favor strange conversations. She said softly. He chuckled once, though it carried little humor. "That's fair." Daniel took a slow breath, then stepped closer so his voice wouldn't carry across the empty platform. "I've got twin girls," he said quietly. Clara blinked again. The statement was so unexpected that she didn't know how to respond. Daniel continued, his voice lowering even further. "They're 5 years old." Clara nodded slowly. "And?" she asked. He met her eyes. Then he leaned slightly closer and spoke the words that would change her life. "My twins need a mother like you." For a moment the world seemed to pause. Clara stared at him, certain she must have misunderstood. "I'm sorry," she said carefully. "Did you say—" "I did," Daniel interrupted gently. He straightened, clearly aware of how unusual the situation sounded. "I know it's sudden, and I know you don't know me. Truth is, I don't really know you either." He gestured vaguely toward the empty station. "But I watched the way you carried yourself when everyone else left." Clara felt a flicker of embarrassment. There wasn't much else to do but sit. Daniel shook his head. Most people would have cried, or shouted, or begged the station master to help them. His gaze softened. "You didn't." Clara looked away toward the mountains. "I've done enough begging in my life." Daniel nodded slowly, as if that answer confirmed something he already suspected. "My girls lost their mother 2 years ago," he said quietly. "Fever took her quick. Since then, it's just been the 3 of us on the ranch." His voice tightened slightly. "I've done my best, but 2 little girls need more than a tired cowboy who burns biscuits half the time." Clara couldn't help the faint smile that touched her lips. Daniel continued, "I didn't come to the station looking for a bride. Honestly, I figured that sort of thing wasn't meant for me." He gestured toward her suitcase. "But then I saw you sitting there alone." Clara met his eyes again. "And you decided I looked too maternal." Daniel scratched his chin sheepishly. "Not exactly." "Then what?" He hesitated. "You looked kind." Clara felt something shift quietly in her chest. Kind, it was a word she had heard many times before, usually spoken with polite pity, but the way Daniel said it sounded different. Not like an apology, like something valuable. "And you think kindness is enough reason to ask a stranger to marry you?" she asked gently. Daniel shook his head. "No, ma'am." He looked directly at her. "But it's a good place to start." The wind rustled across the empty platform again. Somewhere in the distance a hawk cried over the open plains. Clara studied the man standing before her. He was not handsome in the polished way of city gentlemen. His hands were rough, his shirt patched in several places. But there was honesty in his posture, honesty in his eyes. "And your daughters?" she asked softly. "They're waiting in the wagon by the cottonwoods." Clara's heart skipped slightly. "You brought them here?" Daniel nodded. "They insisted." He smiled faintly. "They wanted to see a train." Clara looked toward the distant road where the trees swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. 2 little girls, waiting. She felt something unfamiliar stir deep inside her chest. Hope. Carefully, she stood and picked up her suitcase. Daniel watched her silently, clearly unsure what she would say next. Clara brushed dust from her skirt. Then she looked up at him. "Well," she said quietly, "I suppose the polite thing would be to meet the twins before agreeing to anything so faltering." Daniel's eyes widened slightly. "Does that mean—" "It means," Clara said calmly, "that I am willing to walk with you to the wagon." For the first time since he arrived, Daniel Carter's tired face lit with genuine relief. He placed his hat back on his head and offered a small, respectful nod. "This way, Miss Whitfield." As they began walking toward the dusty road, Clara felt the strange weight of possibility settling gently over her shoulders. Just hours earlier, she had believed her future had collapsed completely. But sometimes life had a curious way of rewriting the story. And as Daniel Carter led her toward the waiting wagon and the two little girls who had unknowingly changed her fate, Clara realized something remarkable. For the first time in many years, she was no longer alone. And somewhere in the golden Montana sunlight, a quiet new chapter of her life was just beginning.